Good evening, folks. Welcome to Damo Meets on Socialist Telly. My name is Damien Willey, better known as Cornish Damo, and given it's a Sunday night, that means I've taken the reins of power for a short while to have a one-on-one chat with a special guest. And what a guest I have tonight, the former Labour MP for Derby North, founder of the resistance movement, fighting for social justice and change. And for those of us still in the Labour Party, depressed at the current leadership, it's nice to hear somebody still believes in such things. It is, of course, Mr. Chris Williamson. Chris, how are you, sir?
Well, very well, thanks. Good to see you.
I've had more direct messages asking for me to speak to you than literally anyone. So I'm thrilled you've been able to join me today. I have. You're a figure that people really, really love hearing from. And so I hope we're making a few people happy today. So thank you for giving me your time today. So Chris, since your departure from the Labour Party, you've gone on to set up the resistance movement, Resist Movement for a People's Party, which has been a grassroots-led challenge, I guess you could call it, to the Labour Party. And particularly, it seems to me, at the failure of the Labour leadership since Corbyn's departure as leader to really continue to put the case forward for socialism. And it was the man the media demonised, after all. You might know something about that, but certainly not the policies he stood for. So how did Resist come about, and how have you found the response to it since it was founded?
Well, I mean, it came about really as a result of the demise of the Corbyn project inside the Labour Party. And a few of us got together and felt that we wanted to try and continue to build on the sort of inspiration, really, I suppose, and the positivity that was a real feature, I think, of Jeremy's leadership of the party. And I've been a member of the Labour Party for getting on for 44 years. And you know, my dreams had come true, really, when Jeremy became the leader of the party. I'd always hoped that one day that we would be able to elect a left leader. I was obviously involved in the efforts to get Tony Benn elected as deputy leader back in the day. He just missed out by, I think, less than 1%. And, you know, I was always a very loyal Labour member and always encouraged people to join the Labour Party. And those that were critical, I used to say, look, join the Labour Party and help us make it a more progressive, a more socialist entity, because if we do that, we can build a genuine mass party and really transform the country. And we got Jeremy elected. Labour became a mass party. It was on course to become a membership of probably well over 1 million, actually. But unfortunately, the saboteurs got to work, and we know what happened. And so, after Labour lost the election in 2019, and Jeremy announced that he was stepping down, I thought that it was really important that we tried to continue to move in that direction and to try and encourage people to recognise the strength of their collective endeavour, that we can bring about change through collective solidarity. We need desperately to build a mass party, a mass movement, should I say, because putting all your eggs in an electoral strategy, I think, is a misplaced proposition. Inevitably, if you just simply rely on elected members, then they're going to let you down. And furthermore, I always felt that, if we were to have got a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour government, we'd need a mass movement to actually defend that government in office. I mean, remember when Jeremy was first elected, a general went on record saying they wouldn't tolerate a Corbyn-led Labour government deciding to cut defence spending or to scrap Trident or withdraw from NATO, and that they would use, and these were his words, fair means or foul to prevent that from happening. So clearly, the establishment was very much against the proposition that Jeremy represented, and I think it needed, therefore, a mass movement to support it, and that is still true today. And obviously, the Labour Party's gone in a very bad direction now, and therefore, I think it's really incumbent upon us to try and build that mass movement, because there's things I think you can achieve outside of the Labour Party, indeed outside of the kind of traditional sort of political sphere, and make a difference on the ground. And we need to draw inspiration from the cooperative pioneers, from the Black Panther Party in the States, from what we've seen in Bolivia, where the movement towards socialism were able to overturn a US-backed coup in less than 12 months, demand new elections, and the socialists came back with an even bigger majority. That's the type of approach I think that we are striving to achieve, but we've obviously been held back by the COVID crisis, and so we're not as far forward as we'd wish, but we've got regional organisers now in every region in the country. Members are joining us. We've got several thousand members already, and I think once things get back to some semblance of normality, I think it will significantly grow.
Brilliant. Well, has the speed of the success has it surprised you so far? I mean, you mentioned the COVID thing has slowed things down, obviously, but still, you've clearly advanced quite quickly in a very short space of time. Has it surprised you, or have you expected it, and especially in light of the way the Labour leadership has gone? Has Keir Starmer inadvertently helped things along for you?
I think he has to some extent, certainly. And, you know, Jeremy encouraged several 100,000 members to join the party, inspired them. And those people haven't gone away. And I think many of them are looking for a new home. And, you know, the People's Party proposition, the idea of a grassroots movement, which is what we are at the moment, I think is attractive to people. And so people are looking for a new home, and many of them have found it in the Resist movement. So we'll see where that takes us. We will be holding a conference which we planned to organise last year. In fact, we got it booked and it was planned to take place in June, but obviously the COVID crisis put paid to that. We're hoping to hold it now at the end of this year, and we will be putting forward a proposition as to whether or not members want to create a new left party. And if that is voted for, then that's what we'll do. But I think the key thing for us, though, is it's not just about setting up a new political party and then saying it's our way or the highway. I think what we have to do is to work out how we can collaborate, work together on the left, because the thing that's really screwed the left, the socialist movement in this country forever, has been our inability to work together. And you know, we've been very much like the kind of life of Brian Judean People's Front, the People's Front of Judea. We've got to find a way of working out the things that we agree with each other on, which is very, very many, and acknowledge that there will be there'll be a number of differences. And I think if we can build that alliance, we can build that collaboration, then I think it is possible to make the breakthrough and you know, really change the course of politics in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Starmer has chosen to write for the establishment media again today. He's done this a number of times by now, and it sticks in my craw, certainly. But media that so often offends us on the left with its right-wing bias and the way it attacks us. And of course, Starmer has imposed diktat upon members rather than seeking their support. His policies remain non-existent. He's driven members away towards yourself, some of them. He's courting donors who are allegedly calling the shots in exchange for cash. His polling's dire, and worst of all, he's incessantly supported the worst Tory government in history. From what you know of Keir Starmer, does he think this is a winning strategy? Is this the sort of politics he believes in, or is he just out of his depth, do you think?
I think it's a bit of both, and I think kind of is retracing the steps that New Labour pursued, and that was to try and win over ex-Tory voters, disgruntled Tories, to get Labour back into power. I think it's a misguided approach. And I remember talking to Tom Harris, who writes for that well-known socialist organ, the Daily Telegraph now. He was a Scottish Labour MP who lost out in 2015 to the massive SNP surge. And I remember, because I believe it or not, was quite popular in the Parliamentary Labour Party, my first term from 2010 to 2015. I remember talking back then to Tom about, my view was that we needed, as a Labour Party, needed to win over, reach out to, inspire, encourage people who don't vote to vote for the Labour Party. That should be our route back to power, to win over the biggest cohort in the country. I think it's around about 15.6 million didn't vote in the last election. The Tories won it with about 13 million. I mean, the biggest cohort, I think, in every election that I've ever looked at. So I think there's fertile territory there. And if you give people a reason to vote, I'm sure they will come out and turn out and vote for you. And that was what I felt we needed to do. And I remember having this conversation with Tom, and Tom metaphorically patted me on the head and said, no, Chris, you don't understand. The thing about people that don't vote is they don't vote, so don't bother wasting your time on them. And I think that's the strategy that Starmer and his cohorts are pursuing now, that they've kind of written off those people who were inspired by Jeremy, those people who don't bother to vote. And you know, the vast majority of them are the very people that the Labour Party was originally set up to represent, to advance the cause of. I mean, there's a kind of predominantly working class communities who have been done over by successive governments for the last 40 years. You could even argue, you know, ever since, the Labour Party was created, it never actually fulfilled its potential to represent the interests fully of the working class. When you look back at what, we could and indeed should have achieved, you look at the very first Labour government in the 20s, how they, betrayed the people that put them there. Even the 1945 to 51 Labour government could and indeed should have gone considerably further than it did. And many of the reforms, wonderful reforms, the consensus they put in place following the 1939 to 45 Second World War, was as a consequence, or it was a kind of a fallout, hangover really, from the need to work in cooperation in a war. situation. And many people, I remember my mum and dad's generation, I mean, they were no way were they going to go back to the indignities of the 1930s. And, you know, they recognized the need to bring about change. And of course, you know, communism was still a potential challenge. And I think they recognized that there was no going back. And so, you know, some of the stuff that they did, I think, was in response to that. And that's why I think they could have gone a lot further. The zeitgeist was in the right place, for example, to abolish public schools altogether, get rid of private education. You know, they could have done that. And that, I think, would have had a much more significant or a much longer lasting significant impact, and that would have built on the other reforms that they put in place. But of course, it was still very much an imperialist government. They still got involved in imperialist wars. I mean, it was that Labour government that sort of acquired nuclear weapons and so on. So, you know, there were a lot of things wrong with that government. And so right the way through, you know, the Labour governments have never really done as much as what they should have done, although, you know, all progressive change since the Second World War have been brought about by Labour governments. But that doesn't mean to say that that's good enough or something that we should merely accept. And that's why I come back to the need for a radicalized, you know, grassroots movement. And our ambition as the resist movement is to raise political consciousness and raise political expectations. There's many things, for example, that Labour in local government, or local government really across the piece, could and indeed should be doing. Powers that have now been made available to local authorities by the Tories, ironically, to build council houses. No impediment now on building council houses because the cap has been lifted off the housing revenue account. But where's the renaissance in council housing? There's been a bit of an increase, and that's welcome, but nothing like what we should be seeing. And there's a massive housing crisis out there. There should be a mass house building program that would generate jobs for people. It would obviously tackle a social need. It would reduce the social security budget. And where you haven't got skilled labour in the local area, I mean, local authorities could merely train them up. And in the meantime, they could use their newfound flexibilities to just simply acquire property on the open market, like they used to do back in the 1970s. When I first joined the Labour Party, there was something called a municipalisation programme. I was a bricklayer actually working for the local authority, believe it or not. I remember going and, you know, doing repairs and maintenance on properties, which weren't on traditional council estates, but they were council owned properties. There's things like a redistributive council tax that could be put in place to ask the rich people in each borough to pay considerably more to not just stop the Tory cuts, but build in some growth and protect the vast majority of households by freezing or even reducing their council tax, depending on how many properties they've got in the higher band. So there's things that can and indeed should be done. And I think if we can give people the wherewithal, give people the information, you know, knowledge is power, isn't it? If we can give that knowledge and power to local communities, then they can be demanding these changes. What we've got to be about, I think, and I used to make this point when I was a member of the Labour Party. It feels strange, actually, not being a member of the Labour Party, because I spent the vast majority of my life, all my adult life, as a Labour Party member. But the key thing for me is that we should be attempting to do politics with people, not to people. And that's what we aim to try and achieve through the resistance movement.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's certainly that sense of being inspired that brought me into the Labour Party. I mean, I haven't been in the Labour Party all my adult life. I was brought in because, you know, a guy stood up and said, "This is what I want to do. I want to change things, and this is the lengths I'm prepared to go to actually do that." And yes, his name was Jeremy Corbyn. And you turn around and you look at the Labour membership now as it's going away and we're losing it. And for the strategies that, if you can call them that the Labour Party is currently putting forward now, to think that they're going to actually attract voters, even though they're driving their own membership away, does seem counterintuitive. And you would think somebody as clever as a QC would perhaps get that. And, you know, as you say, that Labour government of the 1940s that brought in and 50s that brought in the the NHS or Social Security and did implement a mass house building program. And these were huge life-changing events. These really did improve people's lives for the better. And this is what Labour can achieve. But you keep thinking, you keep getting that reference to broad churches that so often happens within the Labour Party, and you just think we're too broad because we've got too many people that are preventing us from actually doing what people want, that doing the things that have inspired people to do, and in fact conspiring to prevent that coming to pass.
Very much so. I mean, and I think as one of the points is, I mean, about all those wonderful things, that transformational policies that Labour put in place from 1945 to 51, although as I say, they could have gone further. It stood the test of time. It created a post-war consensus that lasted until Thatcher came along. But the other thing which we haven't mentioned is, of course, the impact that it's had on inequality in this country. By the mid-1970s, inequality was at its lowest. And really, unfortunately, the path was really prepared for Thatcher to come to power by Dennis Healey, who went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise in 1976 on the grounds that, Britain was running out of money. Look, Britain has its own sovereign currency. We are a currency issuing nation. We simply cannot run out of money. Money is no object for a government. The issue is the capacity in the economy. And so long as you're actually spending up to the capacity of the economy, and we look at what capacity we have in the economy now, we've still got many, many people unemployed. We've got millions of people who are underemployed. We've got a massive need for infrastructure improvements. We have a monumental need for a radical improvements, transformation in our public services. So there's the demand is there, the labour's there, money is no object. To be honest with you, the only deficit that doesn't really matter is the fiscal deficit. It's the deficit in infrastructure, the deficit in poverty, the deficit in healthcare, the deficit in relation to the existential challenge facing humanity, i.e. climate change. These are the kind of deficits that we should be concerned about. But unfortunately, our politicians of every stripe still going on about taxpayers' money and, we run out of money and there's no such thing as a magic money tree. And, even under Jeremy's leadership, we were still using that kind of terminology. And I think, again, coming back to the point I was making about the resistance movement, I think one of the key things is that we need to attempt to do as we seek to raise political consciousness and political expectations is to engage in a kind of political education, not in a kind of patronizing way, but just giving people the tools, the information, so that politicians and the corporate elites, etc., can't pull the wool over our eyes. When people used to say to me that the likes of Alan Sugar will leave the country if Jeremy Corbyn were to come to power, my response was, great, I'll drive him to the airport, tell him to leave his key on the side as he goes, and close the door on your way out. We don't need you, pal. We really don't. No. We don't need these rich elites to fund our public services. And unfortunately, I think, we didn't grasp that nettle when Jeremy was the leader and John McDonnell was the shadow chancellor, to actually make that argument and to raise people's consciousness about how the monetary system works, how the economy works. And by continually talking about taxpayers' money and, John went to great lengths to produce the Grey Book, which accompanied the manifesto and said, we've dotted every I and crossed every T and demonstrated where the money was going to come from to pay for the proposals that were in the manifesto. I remember John making a joke about the only numbers in the Tory manifesto were the page numbers. Now, what is a great soundbite, but it's a misplaced proposition in relation to understanding how the economy works. And it was Henry Ford who once said that if the people understood how the banking and the monetary system actually worked, there would be a revolution by tomorrow morning. And I think our job is to bring about that revolution.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I mean, political education, economic education, I think, is something that's absolutely essential. I think for too long, the media especially promoted this Tory mantra that the economy works exactly the same way as a household budget does. But you have a finite amount of money in your own household. You're not a currency issuer. You can't go around printing money. You'll get arrested. But the state can, and when we issue our own currency, we can print as much as is needed. So every time they say, we can't afford this, as you say, or we've got to pay for this somehow. No, you just print more money, because they've been doing it for years in the form of quantitative easing. But of course, they like to hide what they're actually doing behind flowery language that goes, for the most part, I mean, not to sound patronizing, but goes for the most part over people's heads, these words that mean nothing, essentially, because things are not spelt out in plain English. And I think that's,
it was Richard Murphy. Richard Murphy, if you remember, was advising Jeremy in his first leadership run. And it was Richard's ideas that actually led Chris Leslie to coin the term Corbynomics. And Richard was very much, because if you remember, Richard Murphy was talking about people's quantitative easing and saying, it's fine, okay, all this kind of money that's been created out of nothing, out of nowhere, it's gone to the banks. But what's happened to it? I mean, they've used it for bankers' bonuses, and it starts kind of trickle down. It hasn't worked. No. But if we actually were to use that money directly to invest in infrastructure, etc., public services and so on, we could really actually transform people's lives. I mean, look, Britain's the 5th biggest economy in the world. And yet we've got 14 million people living in poverty. We've got people dying, literally sleeping rough on the streets, people dying on the steps of the Houses of Parliament, for goodness sake, you know. Millions and millions of people in precarious employment. And, you know, it's just unacceptable. I mean, of course, we've seen the demise of the trade unions, and that's partly because of the anti-trade union laws, but also because, of course, under Thatcher and Blair and Brown, skilled manufacturing jobs were just offshored to low-wage economies. In this kind of global economy, you know, they gave the ability of capital to just move wherever they could get, you know, cheaper labour, as it were. And Blair, I remember crowing about the fact that New Labour were talking about modifying, amending the anti-trade union legislation that the Tories had put in place under Thatcher and Major. But he went on to say, but even after our reforms, we'll still have the most restrictive trade union laws anywhere in the Western world, as if that was a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's what's led us to a situation where all those jobs have gone, where millions of people are in precarious employment. Zero-hour contracts now are endemic throughout the land. Trade union membership is half what it was in 1979. Only 13.5% of the people working in the private sector are a member of a trade union. And again, one of the things going back to the resistance movement is we're very much encouraging people that it's really important that you join a trade union. And I think it's important that trade unions step up to the plate as well. And as well as kind of seeking to, and I know it's difficult, but as well as seeking to recruit people, which is so important in employment, and you know, extol the virtues of collective bargaining and so on. I was talking to, we had Tosh MacDonald. I mean, I chair a thing for the resistance movement. We've set up our own, for what you're doing, perhaps not quite as popular as you yet. I think you've been doing incredibly well. But we have our own resistance, resistance TV, which we do every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. If people have a spare hour or so at 7 this Wednesday, we'll be on again. But I was talking to Tosh MacDonald, the former president of ASLEF, and you know, Tosh was making the point that, you know, and I was agreeing that the trade unions do need to step up to the mark, really, and we need to be looking at ways in which we can organise, you know, unemployed workers as well, and reach out into the community and be organising and promoting those sort of activities, you know, outside of the workplace in that sense, to actually build a working class movement. And if you look across then to, you know, the events in Latin America, particularly in Bolivia, the most recent one, where we saw a coup backed by the United States in back end of 2019, just after Evo Morales had been elected with an overwhelming majority, was forced out at the point of the gun. And within 12 months, the movement towards socialism, I think I was just saying at the beginning of our discussion, managed to force new elections, and they came back with an even bigger majority. But the way they were able to do that was a combination of the labour movement, the trade union movement, and the, you know, civil society, you know, pressure groups coming together, as it were, through the kind of umbrella of the movement towards socialism, and they brought the country to a standstill, and they forced these new elections to take place. And that's the sort of thing that we need to, that we should inspire us, really. And I think we need to look to those examples, to liberation movements, progressive movements around the world. And the other thing, again, just to kind of stress what we're about in terms of the resistance movement, is that we're very much an anti-imperialist movement, and we want to build those links with the progressive liberation struggles. And in fact, at our conference later this year, it's not definitely been confirmed yet, but we are very hopeful that we'll have Evo Morales as one of our speakers there. So, you know, we're looking at some fairly, you know, big named people. But it's not just about having a great conference and having these kind of stars, if you like, of the movement. That is important, obviously, because we want it to be a good conference. But we want it to be for a purpose, to inspire people to go back and to organise in their own community. Because this movement will only work. It's not about what I say or do or coming on programmes like this. It's about what grassroots members do, grassroots activists do in their own community. And I think if we can build that network, because, you know, there is so much enthusiasm, I think, still out there. There is so much determination. I think people are fed up of the status quo of this system, which broken system, which it is. And if we can, you know, put people in touch with it, or bring people together, and often people sometimes feel that they're working in isolation. They might be doing a good campaign in their own local community, but feel they're just doing it on their own. But there's lots of these sorts of, you know, groups and campaigns going on all over the country. And our ambition, really, if you like, is to link these people up and learn from each other and grow. And I think through that process, I'm hopeful, I'm confident that we can, you know, really make a massive difference. And like the Black Panthers did, irrespective of what government does, we can make a difference still on the ground. And then we can force governments to change. I mean, ideally, I'd love to see a socialist government elected. That's my ambition And it might be difficult. People might say it's impossible, but I'm a dreamer. That's why I'm a socialist, you know. And if you haven't got a dream, and as Captain Sensible, I think it once said, if you haven't got a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true? So I think it can be done, though. And you know, Labour Party broke through all those years ago. There was a political duopoly in Britain between the Liberals and the Tories, and Labour broke through. There's no reason why we can't break through again. Unfortunately, the Labour Party now is just the flip side of the Tory establishment party. We've got two parties effectively committed to neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a discredited, broken ideology. And the only solution, really, I think, to confront the challenges facing the world, including the biggest challenge of all, as I've already mentioned, climate change, is a collectivist socialist approach. It's not going to be solved through capitalism. Capitalism is the problem. I think it's George Monbiot once said, you know, capitalism is a cancer, and the way you treat cancer is to cut it out. And that's what we have to do with capitalism. And the only way we're going to do that, as I say, is build a socialist movement. And that's not going to be achieved through the Labour Party. And that's why I would encourage people. I know a lot of people are involved in the Don't Leave Organised campaign, but unfortunately, there's no mechanism. I wish there were, but there's no mechanism to wrest control of the Labour Party. The National Executive Committee, only 25% of the members are elected by the grassroots members of the party. The Parliamentary Labour Party is totally out of control. We had a shot at democratising the party, at making members of Parliament accountable. I was leading a campaign, the Democracy Roadshow, overwhelming support for it, but we didn't get it. And we know the bureaucracy is out of control. We saw that from that report that was leaked, and it's even worse now than it was then. So there is no mechanism. So I think the best route for us, therefore, is to, as I say, build a movement outside the Labour Party and start again.
Well. Now, one of the things Jeremy Corbyn embraced and still does, and certainly what left-wing activists have, is alternative media. You're speaking to me today, and you've also created your own media, as you've mentioned already, in the form of Resistance TV, which is on YouTube, which everybody should absolutely subscribe to and listen to your show every week at 7 on a Wednesday. And you're probably more accustomed to this presentation gig than I am these days, but thank you very much for coming and supporting us here too. But do you think without the big money billionaire backers that alternative media, from ourselves to Squawk Box, Canary, Navarra, etc., can really challenge establishment media that has become so entrenched in our society and has peddled the damaging policies of neoliberalism for so many years?
Well, I think it already is challenging it, to be fair. It's difficult, and of course, with algorithms and so on, which are in the hands of these corporate giants that control the social media platforms that we have to use at the moment, that can make our life a bit more difficult. But I think we have already done that. I mean, look at our, I keep saying our, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but, you know, the Labour campaign in 2017. All of the media were against us, as we know. We had the worst possible run-in to an election in my lifetime, probably ever, actually. Right. With the Parliamentary Labour Party seeking to sabotage the efforts to get elected, the bureaucracy doing likewise. And yet, thanks to, it was momentum, it got to be said, before it went off the rails. I mean, they, through their efforts, through the use of social media and grassroots activists, you know, sharing that content, that was able to overwhelm the corporate media's efforts to undermine and to derail our campaign. And, we got the biggest increase in vote share since 1945. So, yes, it can be done. And I think that is the future. I mean, look at the success that you've had already as Socialist Telly. I mean, I think you've had well over 1 million views, and you've only been running a relatively short space of time. So I think there's an appetite for it. So I think people are definitely interested, and so I'm hopeful that we can use this type of platform, as it were, to get our message out. And again, coming back to what we're hoping to do as part of the resistance movement is to encourage local variations of this. I mean, to help people to kind of communicate with each other. So community radio platforms is something that we want to try and help and encourage people to establish in their own local area, as it were. So I think we can subvert the corporate media. I mean, look, the corporate press is kind of on a downward trajectory anyway. I mean, its penetration in the market is massively reduced from when I first got involved in the Labour Party in 1976. And, up until relatively recently, we had to rely on the corporate media to get our message out. And of course, that's not the case anymore. I used to religiously get the local newspaper, for example, and we try and put press releases and cajole and encourage them to carry articles about what we were trying to do to local level, write letters to the local press. I never really bother with them now because we've got an alternative platform that we just simply use social media. We put it out on the various platforms that are there, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all these other platforms that are around, and I think you can actually reach a lot more people that way, to be honest with you. That's not to say you ignore the traditional media, but I don't think it's as important a player as it once was. Having said that, of course, as we saw in the aftermath of the Peterloo massacre, there will be efforts to clamp down on, and we're already seeing that on these alternative methods of communicating, because I think the establishment see it as a threat. So whilst we can use it at the moment, that's not to say that it's always going to be available to us. And in those circumstances, we'll have to think of a smart alternative. And again, coming back to the point about building a movement, if we can use this time to kind of build that movement, then word of mouth will still be a very powerful mechanism to, I think, get and spread our message.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to your conference, which you're hoping to hold later in the year, and the message that perhaps you might consider setting yourselves up as a political party should your membership vote for that. Do you think there is definitely an appetite for that? Do you think that's a likely outcome? And what are your plans going forwards beyond that with Resist?
Well, I mean, there seems to be an appetite. I mean, anecdotally, there definitely seems to be an appetite. I mean, I've been inundated with people saying, set up a new party, Chris. And I mean, I've always been resistant to that. I've said, look, I think our first priority is to establish a movement, a grassroots movement. And in the meantime, we're working with the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, which was originally set up by people like Bob Crow of the RNT, who sadly passed away, and we miss him now. And I think that's a kind of platform, that's an umbrella that can be used, and indeed will be used at the local elections in May if they go ahead. I know a number of councillors have either resigned or they've been suspended or expelled on spurious reasons, and many of them are looking to potentially stand under the Tusk banner. So it remains to be seen. I mean, I think anecdotally, there definitely does seem to be a big appetite. And I think, therefore, that the likely outcome, without sort of prejudging it, of the vote at the conference later in the year will be in favour of setting up a new party. And then we'll have to start that process. And we're at the moment, we're looking at trying to, think through a policy programme, which to a large extent will be based around the Labour manifesto, and we'll try and build on that, and we'll put that out, if you like, to the members to have a view on. Obviously, it won't be a matter for us to hand that down on tablets of stone, as it were. But if there is a vote in favour of establishing a political party, and then we'll hold a separate conference thereafter, a policy conference, if you like, to adopt a programme going forward. But I come back to the point, though, if we do go down the road of establishing a political party, we have to then, I think, look at how we can collaborate, how we can work with other political parties, how we can work with, with the Socialist Party. I've met with Arthur Scargill. And Arthur's Socialist Labour Party, that is still running. It's not as big as it once was, but it is still there as an entity. They do have some councillors. I want to see us working with them. I'd want to see us obviously continue to work, with Tusk, with the Workers' Party, etc. We have to find ways of collaborating, because if we don't do that, then we will absolutely be defeated. Unity is strength. It's an old Labour movement maxim, and we need to actually put that into practice. Yeah,
I was going to say, in the last few days, we've seen a very vocal John Trickett calling out failing Labour leadership. I don't know if you've caught wind of some of the things that
yes, I've seen that, yeah.
Out. And it's not before time somebody said it, I think. And coming back to what you've just said about working with others and collaboration, do you see Resist as complementing Labour if it could, come around to some sort of change in leadership, perhaps? I mean, we had a bit of a debate on this the other day on our weekly roundup show about whether John might be positioning himself, maybe, though our Sarah Grant, who presents with us, she's a bit of a Lavery fangirl, and she reckons he might be a stalking horse. Could you see any of them either of them throwing their hats in the ring, or is there anybody else that you could see having a crack at it to try and swing things back away from what Starmer has done?
It's going to be very difficult. I think part of the problem is that the Parliamentary Labour Party are the gatekeepers. You've got to get a I'm not sure what the percentage is now. I think 10% where there's no vacancy, where there isn't a vacancy. I think the threshold is even higher than that. So you'd have to get a significant proportion of the Parliamentary Labour Party to actually sign the nomination papers. So I'm not sure they could even get past first base camp. I mean, that was one of the arguments I was putting forward in the Democracy Roadshow. My point was, what's it got to do with the Parliamentary Labour Party? They shouldn't be the gatekeepers. And in fact, it was Richard Bergen who came forward with an idea, because I was saying PLP should have no say over who should be the candidate. If there should be any gatekeepers, it ought to be the constituency Labour Party. Because my point was, although I was wrong, I said, look, the Labour Party belongs to its members, but the truth is we know it actually belongs to a small elite at the top, unfortunately. But Richard came forward with an idea that suggested that we could have a system whereby to have a valid nomination, you would need 5% of constituency Labour parties to nominate you, or 5% of the Parliamentary Labour Party, or 5% of affiliated trade unions. Now, that seemed to me to be a very reasonable compromise. But again, that was something else that we squandered, that proposition, to make it easier to get a socialist onto the ballot paper. Because the problem is the Parliamentary Labour Party is totally out of touch with or it certainly was then, I suspect it probably still is now, even though tens of thousands of members have left, totally out of touch with the grassroots membership. Actually, totally out of touch with Labour supporters in the country, and totally, I mean, well, I can't find words that kind of describe how far out of touch they are with ordinary working class communities. They're a million miles away. We've hardly got any working class MPs in the Parliamentary Labour Party now. Very few of us, like myself, have kind of worked with my hands and so on, kind of understand, if you like, the life, working class life in that sense, and what it's like, working in a working class occupation. We've lost that sense that the Labour Party in Parliament, although the Parliamentary Labour Party's never been ideal, but it was more representative, I think, in the past. And I think part of the reason for that has been the demise of the trade union movement. I mean, that used to, the movement used to be a kind of a sort of a conduit into the Parliamentary Labour Party. A lot of people had come through that route, and of course that's. I mean, obviously it is still a route, but it's less so. And unfortunately, many of the people that do come as trade union sponsored. Again, this is a point that Tosh McDonald was making when we spoke. That they get a membership card of convenience, I think, as he described it. So that people who are not really affiliated to or have much affinity with the trade union movement get sponsorship, if you like, but they don't really actually make the case for the trade union membership that actually ensured that they got selected as MP. So I think it's going to be difficult. I mean, I'd love to see the Labour Party change course, but I just can't see it happening for the reasons I've already said. I mean, winning the leadership is the first step. We had Jeremy. And Jeremy couldn't control the Labour Party. I mean, the PLP, as I say, we're miles outside. I mean, look, I suppose, never say never, but I just can't see it happening, frankly. And I mean, good luck if it does. And certainly, yes, I mean, we would want to work with people who are like-minded. I mean, we're not just setting up, as I've said, to just be in competition to the Labour Party. It's not going to be a question of our way or the highway. You back us or you're out. We'll work with people who are like-minded. We have to do, I think. We've got to be pragmatic. Because the forces that are ranged against us are massive, and unless we work together, look. But our power, as has been demonstrated in Bolivia, when the working class stands together, when civil society, when the labour movement stands together, we're undefeatable. I mean, we have this, that old kind of slogan that we used to chant in the 1970s. The workers united will never be defeated, and that's true. We just got to be united.
Chris Williamson, thank you so much for joining me today on Socialist Telly. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you one-on-one, and I wish you all the well with your endeavours, keeping the flame of socialism alive. Good luck in May. Please do come back to update us in the near future. You're always welcome here. The Resist YouTube channel, which Chris hosts, Resistance TV. Resist on Twitter at MFA People's Party, and you can join Resist at www.resistmovement.org.uk. Thank you very much.